3 nights ago, I hit my limit with silence, and I have to tell you why. I was alone in my room, the house settling into evening quiet, the kind of stillness where you can hear your own heartbeat and every doubt speaks with a borrowed voice. I had been circling one question for years, orbiting it like a fearful satellite, and that night I finally stepped into its gravity. I asked God what I'd been afraid to ask. Which habits anger you most? Mine, ours, the ones we dress up as good manners for heaven. I expected a reprimand or a list. What I received lifted the floorboards under my feet and showed me the beams. It was not what I thought, not even close, and it changed the way I understand His nearness, His love, and the ache that sometimes stands inside that love like a flame. I'm writing this in the small chapel corner of my home, a pool of late light laying gold across the floorboards, a simple cross fixed to the wall behind me. That cross has become less decor and more compass. It points me toward a love that doesn't make sense until you need it most. I've wrestled with whether to share any of this. Part of me wanted to hoard the quiet like a secret sanctuary. But the truth of what I heard has been burning holes in my reluctance. It pressed on assumptions I held about holiness, polished ideas I didn't know were thin. If you're going to understand the weight of what came next, you need to know where the question was born. A few weeks earlier, we were deep into filming for the 6th season of The Chosen. We had wrapped the 5th a couple of months before, and our boots were back in the dust, our hearts trying to live inside lines that belong to people braver than we are. There was a scene, Jesus confronting religious hypocrisy, that worked under my skin like a splinter. I kept thinking about how He met people, the ones everyone called sinners, and the ones whose reputations wore halos. His sharpest words weren't for the obvious failures, and that unsettled me. I went home that night and tried to sleep, but the question kept walking the hallways. What if I've misunderstood what actually grieves God? What if some of the habits I consider virtuous are the very doors I've closed in His face? Over the next days, I carried that question like a stone in my pocket. I touched it between scenes, in the quiet before cameras rolled, while extras found their marks and props remembered their places. I thought about the Pharisees who knew the letter and missed the heartbeat. I thought about David, a king who broke commandments and still fell onto mercy, like a man into water. I thought about Peter, whose denials cracked into confession and became strength. A pattern emerged that tugged at me. Maybe heaven distinguishes between symptoms and roots far more than we do. The possibility both frightened and thrilled me. It hit me one evening after a long day on set, the sky leaning toward indigo and the road home unspooling in front of my windshield. I felt no sound, no syllables, just an unmistakable pressure of presence, as though a patient hand had rested on my shoulder. I pulled to the shoulder and turned off the engine. 20 minutes passed like a held breath. My heart sprinted. Not with dread, something closer to the anticipation a child feels when a father clears his throat before speaking. I realized I had been treating God like a distant official, not a father who cares for candor more than polished performance. Right there, with headlights sliding past and the steering wheel warming under my palms, I decided to stop being afraid of the question. I prepared like you would before a conversation that matters. I fasted. I read passages about His character, the ones that refuse to be small. I revisited stories of people who crashed into the boundary where human emotion and divine holiness meet. I searched my motives. I asked for clean hands and a willing heart. And I thought a lot about anger, the human version that burns bridges and the holy version that builds fences around gardens. A parent who shouts a child's name as the little one runs into traffic isn't trying to frighten for sport. Love raises its voice when danger tries to whisper. That reframe kept returning until it felt like a door swinging open. That's the backdrop to the moment 3 nights ago. The house had gone quiet. I knelt beneath the cross, the floor cool beneath my knees, the air carrying a hush big enough for honesty. I asked out loud because sometimes your own ears need to hear your surrender. Show me the habits that anger you most. In me, in us. Show me what I've missed. The answer did not arrive as audio. It arrived as certainty. It had weight and clarity and a kindness that made me ache. And then it began. A peeling back of assumptions, a correction that felt like steady hands turning my face toward the truth. I expected a ledger of infractions. Instead, I was taken to the heart behind the heat. He showed me that his anger is not human tantrum baptized in religious language. It is love standing guard at the edge of a cliff. It flares where anything threatens a beloved life. The habits that provoke it are not merely rule-breaking stumbles. They are patterns that quietly sever our capacity to receive the very affection he's been pouring out. I sat there and cried without knowing I'd started. Not sorrow, exactly. More like the relief of discovering the pain had a name and the cure already had a heartbeat. The more I listened, the clearer it became. This wasn't about condemnation. It was about rescue. For the next 2 days, I kept catching tears at red lights, in grocery aisles, in the middle of making coffee. I thought maturity meant white-knuckling my way through self-improvement projects. Instead, he was inviting me to let him break chains I had learned to decorate. I realized I had to share it because I recognized the fingerprints of these habits in people I love and in the mirror. If you have ever felt far from God while doing all the right things, there is a chance you're wrestling a root while counting leaves. That recognition alone felt like the first loose stone in a wall. Then something shifted in the room around me as palpably as a breeze that wasn't there before. The presence of God gathered close, dense and gentle, like a warm quilt pulled to your neck. My pulse climbed, not because I feared punishment, but because I could sense a revelation coming that would insist on honesty. I braced, then relaxed, then braced again. What came first was not a list. It was a picture. A father at a stove. A small hand reaching for heat it doesn't understand. The father's anger isn't against the child. It's against the burn that wants to mark the child's skin. The metaphor arrived complete and simple. My anger is love responding to what harms you. The line fit inside me like it had been waiting for a room. After that, the floor of ordinary sight gave way. I found myself seeing hearts, people's inner rooms the way God sees them. Some glowed like lamps after dusk, bright, steady, pulsing with a peace that didn't make sense on paper. Others looked dimmed, as though a film of ash had settled over the coals. A few were bound in ways I felt more than saw. Invisible chains that clinked when love tried to move. I watched as certain daily habits, innocent in their packaging, behaved like slow poison, drop by drop stealing color from the flame. Others, approved by crowds and praised by pulpits, stacked bricks between souls and their maker so gradually that the wall felt like part of the house. The revelation stole my breath and then gave it back cleaner. His presence intensified, more gravity than volume, and I knew we were nearing specifics. I felt grief there, and frustration, and something like the fierce tenderness of a first responder. "Are you ready to see?" was the impression, and I nodded, though no one was in the room but me. The vision widened, and I could see living rooms, break rooms, sanctuaries, ordinary places baptizing harmful patterns with respectable names. I saw people convinced they were faithful, but their faces carried the strain of joyless duty. The tragedy of it rose in my throat. He was not angry at them. He was angry at what was stealing from them in broad daylight. He told me he would show me 7 habits, the ones that most provoke his anger, because they drain life from his children, and he warned me not to confuse conviction with condemnation. Every habit he would expose came paired with a promise. He could heal it. I could feel the cost of hearing this and the freedom sewn into that cost. My chest felt tight and strangely light, like a door had been unlatched. He hinted at the pattern. Some of the worst offenders wear disguises. Wisdom that is really pride, dedication that is really fear, love that is really control. The outside gleams while the inside rusts. I knew that if I kept listening, it would demand more than agreement. It would demand surrender. And still, peace stood in the center of the room like an open chair. I stayed kneeling as the atmosphere thickened, each breath a prayer I didn't have to articulate. I understood that this would not be a quick fix or a tidy sermon. It would be surgery. It would be the end of certain excuses and the beginning of a truer rest. I also understood that all of it, even the sharp parts, came wrapped in love. Unembarrassed, unwithholding, impossibly patient love. I waited, trembling and calm at the same time, on the brink of specifics. The room seemed to lean forward with me. And then, with the gentleness of a hand turning a page, he prepared to name the first. The first habit came softly, not like thunder but like a whisper that still managed to shake the walls inside me. It was self-condemnation, dressed up as humility, hidden beneath the language of piety, but poisonous just the same. God showed me how often I'd knelt beneath the weight of my own judgment, mistaking it for reverence. He said, "You call it humility, but it is pride in disguise. Every time you rehearse your failures, every time you call yourself unworthy, you lift your opinion higher than mine." The words fell heavy, but their weight was mercy. I saw flashes of moments when I had dismissed compliments, deflected grace, or refused peace because I thought suffering longer would make me purer. In that moment, I understood. My refusal to forgive myself had been another way of saying, "Your sacrifice was not enough." His presence pressed closer, and I felt love pierce the shame that had wrapped itself around my spine for years. "True humility," he continued, "is standing in the full light of my forgiveness without turning away." I saw, with aching clarity, how self-criticism had become a shield to protect me from deeper trust. The habit I'd called devotion was rebellion wearing church clothes. I whispered a quiet apology, not for my sins, but for refusing to believe they were already paid for. Then the second habit surfaced, an addiction to busyness disguised as dedication. I saw calendars crammed with holy intentions, hands that never rested, hearts that never healed. "You think motion equals devotion," God said, "but you're sprinting away from intimacy and calling it service." The vision showed me people racing through their faith like marathoners on treadmills, going nowhere but still applauding their endurance. I saw myself there too, performing exhaustion as proof of love. He spoke again, gentler now. "I don't need your production. I desire your presence." Those words undid me. For years, I'd been chasing purpose like it could save me, filling every quiet space before he could fill it himself. The truth was so simple that it felt impossible. I'd mistaken activity for connection. He wasn't asking for my schedule. He was asking for me. The silence after that realization was the first real rest I'd had in years. The third habit struck closer to the bone: loving others conditionally while demanding unconditional grace for myself. I saw the invisible scales I'd carried, keeping score, measuring worth, rationing affection to those who performed the way I approved. "You want mercy without giving it," he said, not accusing, just honest. "You hold people hostage to your expectations, yet you expect me to set you free." The vision shifted, and I watched faces I knew: friends, family, strangers, each marked by the weight of my withheld kindness. The grief of that sight cracked something open inside me. "Love without ledger," he whispered. "Forgive without waiting for an apology. Give what you've been given." I realized that every time I'd chosen resentment, I'd built a wall between myself and the joy of divine love. God wasn't angry because I failed to love perfectly. He was heartbroken that I'd limited my own capacity to receive the kind of love that never keeps score. Then came the fourth habit. Prayer turned into transaction. I saw myself kneeling, not in communion but in negotiation. Lists of needs, deals for blessings, endless requests without relationship. "You talk at me," God said, "but rarely with me." The words were tender, not scolding. "I am not your vending machine, I am your friend." Images unfolded of countless prayers I had rushed through, waiting for answers but not intimacy. I felt the ache of how often I tried to change circumstances instead of letting Him change me. He invited me to imagine prayer as breathing. Inhale, love. Exhale, trust. "Stay long enough to hear my heart," he said. That single line turned prayer from a task into a homecoming. The fifth habit unfolded next: comparison. It slithered through hearts like smoke, choking joy wherever it settled. I saw men and women staring at each other's blessings, blind to their own. God's voice trembled with sorrow. "You look sideways when you were meant to look up. You trade wonder for envy, purpose for mimicry." I saw myself scrolling through successes, achievements, highlights, and quietly asking why my life didn't look like theirs. "You missed the design I wrote uniquely for you," he said. "You are not supposed to be anyone else's reflection. You are my original." His anger here felt protective, like a parent snatching a child away from a counterfeit treasure. The sixth habit followed like a shadow: the hunger for human approval. It looked noble on the surface: kindness, politeness, diplomacy. But underneath, it was worship of applause. "You've let other people's opinions become louder than my affirmation," God said. "You polish your image until you no longer recognize yourself." I could feel his grief more than his fury, the sadness of a father watching his child wear masks to be loved. He reminded me, "When you chase the applause of the crowd, you turn your back on the cheer of heaven." And finally came the seventh, the one that tied them all together, turning faith into performance. God's tone deepened, weighted with compassion. "You've made relationship a duty, worship a transaction, obedience a competition." I saw churches buzzing with effort, believers exhausted from proving what was already promised. Then he said the sentence that broke me: "I want your heart, not your performance." Every memory of striving collapsed under the gravity of that truth. I had spent years trying to earn what had been freely given from the beginning. When the final words settled, I realized these 7 habits weren't random. They were the same lie told 7 different ways. You must earn what you already have. God revealed that every destructive pattern grows from the root of disbelief in His love. You keep working for what is already yours, He said. You strive for what I've completed. You earn what I've freely given. His voice softened to a whisper. You are already mine. I felt something in me break and rebuild at once. The anger I'd feared turned out to be fierce affection, love refusing to watch me drown in illusions. Each habit he named wasn't an indictment, it was an invitation, an open hand saying, "Let me show you how to live free." He began to paint glimpses of what that freedom looks like. Instead of self condemnation, confidence grounded in grace. Instead of frantic motion, peace that breathes. Instead of conditional affection, love that flows without counting cost. Prayer became dialogue, comparison turned to contentment, validation found its source in divine approval, and faith returned to its rightful home. Relationship. I could feel my pulse slow, the air thick with something holy and alive. "Every chain you've forged through these habits," he said, "I can break, not by your effort, but by your surrender." The sentence hung in the air like incense. It smelled of freedom. I saw that deliverance wasn't about willpower. It was about receiving love until nothing else fit. When his voice quieted, silence filled the room. But it wasn't empty. It was full of rest. I realized I had just been shown the anatomy of divine anger. Love standing between a father and the wounds that threaten his children. Every flash of wrath was actually rescue. Every word of correction was a doorway back to intimacy. I stayed there, trembling, undone, aware that nothing would ever be the same. He had exposed the roots of my striving, not to shame me, but to heal me. The tears that came weren't regret, they were release. Somewhere deep in that quiet, I felt the echo of his last words that night. "Remember, every habit that angers me is also an opportunity to know me more deeply." And with that, the room exhaled and I finally understood what holy freedom feels like. Weightless, forgiven, and alive. When his voice finally paused, the room did not fall silent. It breathed. It hummed with an unseen warmth that seemed to pulse through the air itself, as if the walls had been listening too and were now exhaling. I stayed there, kneeling, unable to move, because something greater than understanding was happening. It wasn't just knowledge being given, it was surgery. Love had entered the places where fear had lived so long, and it was quietly, methodically taking back territory. I remember thinking how strange it was that the pain of conviction could feel so much like peace. Every habit he named, self-condemnation, busyness, conditional love, comparison, performance, still echoed like bells in my mind, each one carrying both grief and hope. Yet the deeper truth had begun to take root. His anger was not an accusation. It was protection. It was love fighting back against the lies that had shaped me. And then he began to show me what freedom actually looks like. Not as a theory, but as a life. In a sweep of vision, I saw myself living without the weight of constant proving, smiling without performance, resting without guilt, loving without measurement. I saw prayer that flowed like conversation instead of negotiation. I saw stillness that wasn't laziness but sacred trust. And woven through it all was the same sentence, glowing like fire, written across the sky. "You don't earn love, you live from it." God spoke again, the tone so gentle it felt like the tide coming in. "When you stop trying to deserve me, you begin to discover me. When you let go of earning, you start to experience abundance. My anger has never been against you, Jonathan. It has been against every lie convincing you that you must buy what has already been paid for." The words struck like sunlight, breaking through fog. All my years of striving, every sleepless night rehearsing how to be better, holier, more disciplined, they had been an echo of the same deception. I had been trying to manufacture peace while standing next to the river of it. His love, didn't demand my excellence. It required my honesty. And for the first time, I felt free enough to be small, to be quiet, to simply belong. He went deeper. Every need you've tried to meet through performance, he said, is a genuine need I designed. But sin twisted its fulfillment. The desire for significance, for affection, for approval, none of these are wrong. They become chains only when you reach for them apart from me. Images unfolded, years of moments where I chased applause, mistaking noise for worth. I saw how self-rejection had masqueraded as humility, how exhaustion had paraded as devotion. But in each picture, I could see him standing there, never distant, never disgusted, just waiting. Waiting for me to stop performing long enough to feel his hands still on my shoulders. He showed me what the world sees when his children remain trapped in these habits. When you live enslaved to earning, he said, faith becomes another self-help brand. The world stops seeing me as love and starts seeing religion as pressure. But when you live free, when your joy no longer depends on success or comparison, the world sees me again. That sentence tore me open. All the sermons I'd given, the prayers I'd prayed, the roles I'd played, they meant nothing if my life didn't tell the truth of his heart. I realized that to preach grace without resting in it is like trying to give water from an empty well. His anger wasn't disappointment. It was mercy refusing to let his message die in hypocrisy. Then came the most unexpected revelation. Jonathan, he said, you've struggled with every single one of these habits, yet I never loved you less. I never pulled back my favor. I waited, not because I needed you to improve, but because I wanted you to awaken. His voice was steady, like the heartbeat of eternity. My anger is never about losing patience with you. It is my refusal to lose you. I broke. Tears came fast, uninvited, unstoppable. Not from shame, but from the impossible tenderness of being loved like that. Loved without earning, without pretense, without conditions. I'd thought divine anger would look like fire. Instead, it looked like a father holding his child too tightly to let him wander into harm again. And then, softly, he began to show me my past through his eyes. Scenes flickered like a reel of film. Times I had chosen self-criticism over grace, busyness over rest, comparison over gratitude. Yet in every frame, he was there. I could see him beside me when I rehearsed lines for The Chosen and worried I wasn't good enough. When I overfilled my days with work to feel holy. When I measured my worth against others. Every moment that I thought proved my distance had actually been proof of his patience. He whispered, every time you rejected yourself, I was still proud of you. Every time you ran, I followed. Every time you performed, I waited. I have never loved a future version of you. I have always loved the you that breathes right now. The revelation was unbearable and beautiful at once. The anger of God was the ache of love that could not stand to watch me suffer by my own design. His fury was tenderness sharpened by truth. Then his presence shifted again, filling the room like music, soft, wide, endless. I sensed he wanted to speak not just to me, but through me. This encounter, he said, isn't only for you. I want you to tell my people that my anger is not about punishment. It is about rescue. I am not furious at them. I am furious for them. The habits that steal their joy are the enemies I am fighting. His words vibrated through the air, each one charged with authority and compassion. Tell them, he said, that I am not asking for perfect behavior. I am asking for surrendered hearts. Tell them that every chain of performance, every addiction to approval, every cycle of comparison can break in the light of my love. When they understand that I am not angry at them, but at what enslaves them, freedom will come. I wanted to argue that I wasn't strong enough to carry such a message, but his response silenced the thought before it finished forming. You don't have to carry it, he said. You only have to tell it. The message itself will do the carrying. I sat there long after his voice quieted, the room still glowing with the residue of his nearness. My heart felt rewritten, my mind unclenched. Every defense, every fear, every ambition had been replaced with one steady certainty. I was loved beyond correction, beyond improvement, beyond performance. In that stillness, I realized something extraordinary. Holiness wasn't the absence of struggle. It was the presence of honesty. God wasn't waiting for flawless obedience. He was waiting for surrendered authenticity. I had spent my life trying to look worthy in His eyes, when all along He had been looking through the disguise and seeing the sun. He never stopped adoring. I think that's when healing truly began. Not in the thunder of revelation, but in the quiet acceptance that I didn't need to perform for love that had never been conditional. The silence that followed felt alive, the kind of silence that listens. I closed my eyes, and in that sacred hush I heard his final whisper for the night. Jonathan, remember, every correction I give is an invitation closer, not a command from afar. My anger ends where your surrender begins. And just like that, peace settled over me. Not the kind that visits, but the kind that stays. For 3 days after that night, I carried his words like fire sealed beneath my ribs. Every errand, every conversation, every mundane noise around me seemed to fade behind the quiet hum of what I just witnessed. My heart had been rewired, and yet I wasn't sure how to live with the new rhythm. Love that fierce, love that protective, changes everything it touches. It doesn't let you return to the way things were. It doesn't let you keep pretending that devotion means exhaustion or that service can replace relationship. I remember standing in front of the mirror one morning, toothbrush in hand, realizing how often I'd prayed for transformation while resisting the discomfort that comes with it. Now, it was happening, and it was undoing me in the best way. I no longer felt the need to strive or polish myself into worthiness. Something inside me had unclenched. For the first time in years, I didn't hear the accusing whisper of "not enough." Instead, I heard a steady voice saying, "You were never meant to earn it." That awareness spilled into everything. I drove slower, spoke softer, laughed easier. My prayers stopped sounding like grocery lists and started sounding like breathing. I'd sit in my car before filming and whisper, "I'm here, Lord." Not to ask for anything, but to stay aware that He was too. It was startling how quickly peace began to rewrite my habits. It was as if God was saying, "Now that you've seen what angers me, let me show you what delights me." And so, He did. He began revealing glimpses of what life looks like when those 7 habits lose their grip. I saw people who had stopped fighting themselves and started living from love instead of for it. I saw rest where there used to be striving, laughter where there used to be guilt. I could sense the heartbeat of heaven celebrating, not perfect performance, but restored intimacy. "This," He whispered, "is what I've been fighting for." But freedom, I soon learned, comes with its own kind of tension. When the old ways die, they don't go quietly. The next few days became a tug of war between revelation and resistance. My mind would default to its old patterns, questioning, doubting, calculating, but my spirit would interrupt with truth. When shame tried to creep back in, I could almost hear God say, "Not anymore. That chain is broken." Still, part of me was afraid. Freedom can be unsettling when you've lived most of your life earning approval. It's easier to stay in cages that feel familiar than to step into wide open grace. I told God as much one evening. "What if I mess this up again?" I asked. The answer came instantly. "Then you learn what mercy is for." That night, He woke me again. Not with words this time, but with presence. It was heavy and light all at once, like air thickened by meaning. I sat up, heart pounding, and He spoke into the space around me. "Jonathan, you've seen what angers me, but now you must understand why I showed you." His voice felt like it came from inside my own heartbeat. "I didn't reveal these things so you could fear me. I revealed them so you could lead others into freedom. Tell them my anger isn't punishment, it's protection. Tell them it's love that refuses to watch them shrink." The weight of those words pressed into me until I couldn't stay sitting. I knelt again, that familiar floor under my knees, and said, "But God, who am I to tell anyone?" His response wrapped around me like laughter soaked in kindness. "You're the proof," He said. "You're what grace looks like in motion. I didn't choose you because you're perfect. I chose you because you know what it's like to need me." Tears blurred my sight, but they felt different now, clean, purposeful. It struck me that for all my years of trying to act like I belonged to Him, the real belonging began when I stopped performing. Every wall I'd built for protection had become a barrier against love. And one by one, He was dismantling them with tenderness disguised as fire. He started to show me how each of those habits could be redeemed, transformed into something holy. Self-condemnation could become gratitude. Busyness could become worshipful stillness. Conditional love could mature into mercy. Even comparison could evolve into celebration. It was as though He was handing me keys to a kingdom I'd been standing outside of all along. "Do you see it now?" He asked. "My anger is not the end of relationship. It's the doorway back into it." I realized then how wrong I'd been about holiness. I used to think holiness meant spotless perfection, an unbroken record of good days. But holiness, as He showed me, was wholeness, being fully alive in His presence, unafraid of vulnerability, unashamed of weakness, unhurried in love. It wasn't a staircase to climb. It was a home to return to. When dawn came that morning, light slipped through the blinds like soft applause. I felt different. My chest wasn't tight anymore. My thoughts didn't race to guilt before gratitude. Even the air seemed clearer, as though the whole house had exhaled. That's when I knew. This revelation wasn't meant to end with me. It was meant to move outward, into living rooms, into conversations, into hearts that had forgotten rest. In the days that followed, I began writing everything down, not as a sermon, not as a script, but as a letter, a testimony. Every sentence felt like it carried someone else's freedom tucked inside it. I could see faces as I wrote, people exhausted by religion, ashamed of their imperfections, still believing they had to audition for love. "Tell them," He kept saying, "that I'm not waiting for perfection, I'm waiting for permission to love them where they are." I hesitated again, worried I'd misrepresent Him, but He answered before the fear could grow roots. "Don't sanitize my love," He said. "Let them see how fierce it is. Let them feel the fire that heals." So I wrote through tears. I wrote until dawn bled into morning, until my hand cramped, until I realized this wasn't just about 7 habits. It was about the 8th miracle. Love that refuses to give up. When I finally looked at the pages, they were soaked with something sacred. Grace and ink intermingled. Every line carried the pulse of his heart, that we are already loved, already chosen, already home. And just as I set the pen down, I felt that presence again, soft but steady, hovering like promise. Jonathan, he whispered, this isn't the ending. This is the calling. Tell them I'm angry because I love too deeply to be indifferent. The room went quiet again, but it was not an empty silence. It was holy, the kind that waits for obedience. And I knew the next step wasn't to stay in this peace alone. It was to speak, to share, to become the living echo of what I'd just heard. I rose from the floor, heart trembling, but ready. Outside, the morning had turned gold, and it felt like the world itself was whispering the same thing he had said all along. My anger ends where your freedom begins. And that was the moment I realized the story wasn't over. It was only beginning. The morning after I finished writing everything down, I sat in that same quiet corner of my house where this whole journey began. The air still carried the fragrance of prayer and candle wax. The light came in soft and golden, catching the edges of the wooden cross on the wall. For a long time, I just sat there listening, not for a new revelation, but for the echo of what had already been said. It felt like heaven had written its truth across the walls of my heart, and all I could do was read it back through tears. What God had revealed about his anger still burned inside me, but it was no longer a fire of fear. It was warmth. It was light in places that had been cold for too long. I realized his anger had never been the threat I thought it was. It was the sound of love shouting over the noise of lies. It was the cry of a father who refuses to let his children mistake survival for life. For years I'd worn faith like armor, hoping it would make me strong enough to deserve him. But now, stripped of performance, I felt lighter, freer, more human, and somehow more holy. Because holiness, I learned, isn't about rising above our humanity. It's about letting love enter every part of it. The week that followed was full of small miracles. Conversations that used to drain me suddenly overflowed with gentleness. Old triggers lost their sting. I caught myself smiling at strangers for no reason other than the quiet joy of existing in grace. It wasn't that the world changed. It was that I finally saw it through his eyes. I noticed something else too. Whenever I talked to people about faith, they leaned closer, not because I was eloquent, but because they could sense peace. Real peace doesn't preach, it breathes. And that's what I had become, a living exhale of what he breathed into me that night. One evening, I sat by the window watching the sky turn from gold to violet, and I asked him what he wanted me to do with all of this. His answer came, simple and steady. Tell them. Tell them I'm not angry at them. I'm angry for them. Tell them my anger is love that refuses to look away. Tell them I'm not keeping score. I'm keeping watch. Those words rolled through my spirit until they became part of my heartbeat. I thought about all the people weighed down by guilt, trying to earn affection from a God who already calls them beloved. I thought about those who confuse striving with purpose or silence with disapproval. I thought about every person who has ever looked at their reflection and wondered if grace could really include them. And I realized this message wasn't a private encounter. It was a mirror for every soul that has ever felt far from home. So this is what I need you to hear. You are not the disappointment you imagine. You are not the failure your fear keeps rehearsing. You are the reason God's anger exists, because He refuses to let you settle for less than the love He dreamed for you. Every chain that binds you is something He intends to break, not because you earned freedom, but because you were made for it. When I began sharing this revelation publicly, something remarkable happened. Messages poured in, people confessing they had been living on autopilot, calling exhaustion faithfulness and shame humility. Others said they wept because for the first time they understood that conviction and condemnation are not the same thing. Conviction pulls you closer. Condemnation pushes you away. God's anger, I realized, is conviction made visible. It's the pull of love strong enough to rescue. I saw this transformation unfolding in others just as it had in me. Marriages softening, friendships mending, people rediscovering joy in simply talking to God again without trying to impress Him. That's when it hit me. This was never meant to be a dramatic revelation for one person. It was a reminder for all of us. A reminder that the heart of God is still tenderness clothed in strength. And then came the moment I knew would change everything. The prayer that closed the circle. I went back to that same flow where I'd first asked the question, God, what habits anger you most? The air felt different now, lighter, almost sweet. I took a deep breath and said, Father, thank you for showing me your heart. But now I ask for one more thing. Help me live from this love every day. Immediately, I felt that familiar warmth surround me. His voice came softly, carrying the tone of a father tucking his child into peace. Jonathan, that's all I've ever wanted, for my children to live loved, to wake up knowing they're already mine, to rest without guilt, to create without fear, to serve without striving. That's what holiness looks like, freedom wrapped in love. I wept again, not because I was broken this time, but because I was whole. And now, as you hear this, I want to pray the same peace over you. Father, I pray for every heart listening, for the ones who have carried the weight of trying to earn what you've already given, for the ones who confuse discipline with distance and shame with conviction. Show them the truth, that your anger is not against them, but against the lies that keep them from you. For those who've been drowning in self-condemnation, lift their heads. Let them see themselves through your eyes, blameless, beloved, enough. Replace their fear with confidence rooted in grace. For those who have hidden behind busyness, afraid to sit still in your presence, teach them rest. Let them feel the safety of silence with you, the kind that heals, not condemns. For those chasing approval, remind them that they are already celebrated in heaven, that no applause could add to what you've already declared. This one is mine. And for those who've turned faith into performance, remind them that you never asked for an act. You asked for a heart. Bring them home to simplicity, to friendship, to love that requires nothing but honesty. Father, help them trade striving for surrender, guilt for gratitude, fear for freedom. Let them wake tomorrow not to earn your affection, but to live from it. Let this be the generation that finally understands that your anger isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of healing. In Jesus' name, Amen. When the last word left my lips, I felt an overwhelming stillness, a silence so deep it hummed with peace. I knew heaven had leaned close, listening. And maybe that's the whole point of everything I've said. God isn't waiting for perfect people. He's waiting for honest ones. His anger doesn't burn to destroy. It burns to restore. It's love, fierce and unstoppable, calling you by name. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. You are loved. Not later. Not when you improve. Now. Completely. Irrevocably. Let that truth settle into your bones until it changes the way you breathe. Because when you finally understand that God's anger was never meant to push you away, but to pull you closer, that's when freedom begins, and it never ends.